Hi, this is Shadi, and today we're going to be talking about survival. This isn't about learning a particular art or sets of techniques that's going to help you become invincible against multiple opponents or coming out like a Hollywood movie star after beating up 10 people. This is strictly to increase somewhat your chances of survival. No fight is guaranteed to anyone, whether it is 1 versus 1 or 10 versus 1. So what we will do today is actually go through the old approaches of Kenjutsu and Jujutsu and also compare it with today's fighters when discussing multiple opponents. So we're going to see whether these old principles are still being applied, these that will actually increase your chances of survival. You know, they say choose your battles carefully, avoid dark alleys, avoid places where there's trouble, but sometimes, unfortunately, a fight will pick you and there's no running away from it, especially when someone else's life is on the line, someone you care about or someone you're very close to. So first, let's start with the old ways of the sword. The sword is a very long weapon and it can do a lot of damage just by having it touching you. So it's long, so it can keep distance, and at the same time it's very dangerous. So here you see Iaido katas simulate a few scenarios, and that's how you train them. There's multiple opponents, as you just saw here. He struck from behind and the front. There's also leading up to 8 directions, like here you see the Happo Giri, or the 8 directions with the boken. Just with a slight turn of the hips, you can easily change directions and strike. This is something that was being used by old samurais and soldiers in order to, again, increase their chances of survival in the battlefield. So keeping distance and also being swift with your hips and turning away is very important. Keeping something long that's going to keep distance is very important. That's the sword way of doing it. So here you see the 8 directions concept is still being applied in Judo with Happo no Kuzushi. This is not for multiple opponents, obviously, but here the unbalancing can happen in 8 directions: north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. All 8 directions. Here you see you are doing Happo no Kuzushi with the hips and everything. You see this where we call Randori in Aikido, where many are attacking you. Today it is a more of a breathing and mental exercise, but the principles are still there. You are actually still moving. You're using someone else as shield as they are charging you. You are constantly on the move. You have a very upright posture. You're not running away. You're not ducking. And at the chance of having an opening, this is where you run. So let's see today's fighters and actually trained fighters. The first example is Dan the Wolfman, still exhibiting, I would say, the same principles of good atemi, which is simulating the sword, but it's actually with your hands to keep distance and minimizing contact, and also using someone else as shield. And the third principle is here, constantly on the move. If you missed my talk with Dan where he talks about surviving 10 men at a bar fight, I'll link it at the end. Here you see the enlister is another one where he is very big on the concept of using someone as a shield. Having one coming at you rather than 2 is obviously better. So again, this we are talking about somewhat realistic scenarios where your chances of survival are somewhat high. We are not talking about 10 or 6 or 15 people. We are talking about a reasonable number. So here you see also striking is very crucial because it keeps them at bay, minimizes contact, and also can create a lot of damage. Very similar to the sword. So here you see shielding, very minimal grappling, and using someone as a shield, constantly on the move. These tricks will raise your chances of survival. Now, when it comes to grappling, I would say don't use it unless the following reasons. 1, you are very efficient at it. You can do it very quickly, a takedown. And 2, you have already assessed the situations. Probably you see that these people are not, as strong as you. They're not as athletic as you. They just happen to be quote unquote tough guys. Then you would see that, okay, this is a good environment for me to actually use my grappling. And finally, cannot talk about self-defense without talking about Valente brothers. I've actually reached out. They possibly have something, but they gave me some pointers. There's nothing filmed yet, but basically it's the same principles. Good atami is very important. Basic atami that can actually deliver, I wouldn't say harm, but would deliver a few good strikes where someone is rendered useless or harmless for a few seconds until you can get away, and also using the shield concept. And finally, the third one, which is the most important one, is constantly being on the move. This is to say we are past the negotiation phase and de-escalation. This is where it already happened. And again, good atami is very important. Now, finally, I want to go back to the sword. The sword, I believe, is not completely dead. It is a long weapon. We are not walking around with swords, that's true, but Kendo, the police, there's a reason why they're still training it. Managing your distance, managing, reflexes. And also there is a very interesting story I heard on Shogo's podcast where he talked about a kid who was a downgrade in Kendo, and he was actually holding his umbrella where he was approached by multiple other students. They were harassing him. For those of you who don't know, Kendo has 4 points where you can score ippon. You have the head, you have the throat, you have the stomach, and finally the wrist. And that kid used his umbrella to actually strike the wrist of one of the kids. It can hurt a lot, but it does not injure, fortunately. So it startled them, and they actually fled the scene. So I would say practices like Kendo, Can Française, etc., they still have their place. There's a reason why the army or the police, etc., they still use a lot of their teachings. So again, this video is about increasing your chances of survival, not about, confidently taking on multiple opponents or planting false confidence into people's heads. Sometimes the fight picks you. It's not always you can avoid it, especially when you have someone like your son, your wife, your husband, etc. So if you have anything else to add, please let me know down below. Also, I'll link my talk with Dan at the end, where he talks about his conflict with 10 other men at the bar, where he just said it's about survival and he just fled the scene. So also consider supporting me on Patreon. I have exclusive content for the patrons only. This was Shadi, and thank you for listening.